What's up, everybody? Blessed be. My name is Manon, and you are watching Witch in the Working, where we will be discussing all things witchy in and around, throughout and about, above, below, and beyond. This video offers my personal views and opinions on the topic at hand. Please visit me on my other platforms as well, including Facebook, Instagram, and Patreon, all linked down in the description below. The full script to this video, and most of the others, is available on my Patreon account for download if desired, to build your very own Witch in the Working Book of Shadows. Do you need help with a spell or a fancy tarot reading? Shoot on over to my store, Bewitching and Bizarre, linked down in the description below for your personalized working and or reading. Now, in today's video, we're diving headfirst into a topic that's been buzzing all over the witchcraft community. Traditional witchcraft and traditional Wicca. The differences, the similarities. What's the story with these things? Are they really that different? Is one more powerful or more authentic than the other? Or are we all working, the same magic with slightly different flavor? Spoiler alert, it's probably the last one, but with a twist. I'm going to walk you through the overlapping practices, the deeper layers of Wicca that often get overlooked, and why I believe traditional Wicca actually brings something more to the table when it comes to the craft, without taking away from what traditional witchcraft has to offer. So grab your tea, light that candle, and let's clear the air on this one. Roll intro. Welcome back, everybody. So, all right, this is definitely going to ruffle feathers. Again, very controversial, but this is my take on it. All right, let's cut through the fog right from the jump. In the online world, and even in some real-life circles, it's easy to get lost in all the titles. Wiccan, witch, traditionalist, eclectic, and on and on and on. One of the most common points of confusion, the difference between traditional witchcraft and traditional Wicca. Folks treat them like two completely different worlds, sometimes even opposing sides of the magical spectrum. But the truth, they're more like siblings who were raised in the same house but took slightly different life paths. Let's start by defining what each of these actually is. Traditional witchcraft, in its most basic sense, refers to folk-based magical practices rooted in pre-modern Europe, especially the British Isles. It's often passed down through families or tightly knit groups, focusing heavily on local spirits, land energies, ancestors, and seasonal cycles. There's usually no set dogma, no formal clergy, and no worship of a defined pantheon unless the individual practitioner chooses to include it. The emphasis is on practice, relationship with the land, and experiential wisdom. Think hedge riding, spirit flight, charms, and deep earthy workings. Traditional Wicca, on the other hand, is a religious and initiatory system. It came into the public eye through Gerald Gardner in the 1950s, but contrary to what some believe, it did not come out of thin air. It drew on older traditions, ceremonial magic, folk customs, and mystery cult structures. Traditional Wicca includes the same deep connection to nature, spirits, and ancestors, but it's built around a clearly defined system that includes coven structure, degrees of initiation, specific ritual tools, and a strong focus on polarity through the god and goddess. Here's where people often get tripped up. They see Wicca as fluffy, light-hearted, and modernized, while they view traditional witchcraft as gritty, raw, and more authentic. And that might be true when comparing eclectic Wicca to the deeper strands of the craft. But when we're talking about traditional Wicca, Gardnerian, Alexandrian practices, the initiatory kind that traces back to the earliest covens, we're dealing with a whole different animal. Traditional Wicca is structured, yes, but not restrictive. It's ritualized, sure, but it's still earthy and powerful. It honors the ancestors, spirits of place, and natural cycles just as much as traditional witchcraft, if not more, because those elements are literally woven into every Sabbat, every Esbit, and every initiation. The real issue is that a lot of people only know Wicca from books at big chain stores or memes on social media. They've never stepped into a Wiccan circle led by someone who's been through years of training and initiation. They've never seen the depth that comes from working within a living tradition that's been passed down, tweaked, preserved, and evolved over decades. So they assume that Wicca is shallow because all they've seen is the surface. Meanwhile, traditional witchcraft is enjoying a bit of a renaissance. And that's awesome, truly. It's great to see people digging into their cultural roots, working with spirits, learning old techniques, and honoring the land. But sometimes this resurgence comes with a side of smugness, like Wicca is somehow less than or inauthentic compared to the real craft. That's where the misunderstanding kicks in. What people don't always realize is this: traditional Wicca does everything traditional witchcraft does, but a little bit more. It takes the same foundational practices and wraps them in a deeper, ritualized religious experience. It doesn't just cast a circle for spell work. It opens sacred space to honor divine forces. It doesn't just light candles on solstices. It celebrates those days as part of a living mythos that connects deity, nature, and human experience in a cyclical, symbolic way. So here's the deal. This isn't about saying one is better than the other. It's about setting the record straight. Traditional Wicca isn't the watered-down Instagram version people love to mock. It's a valid, powerful, and ancient feeling system that walks hand in hand with the craft, and often gets unfairly left out of the conversation by people who think they've graduated from it. Before anyone dismisses traditional Wicca, they should take a closer look. Not just at the memes or surface level books, but at the heartbeat of the tradition itself. Because once you do, you'll see that the difference between traditional witchcraft and traditional Wicca isn't about which is more real. It's about whether you want your craft to also serve as your religion, with all the spiritual depth, mystery, and sacred rhythm that comes with it. Let's be real for a second. When people start comparing traditional witchcraft and traditional Wicca, they often act like these are two completely different beasts. Like one is wild and rugged and the other is polished and fluffy. But if you actually take a step back and look at what's happening in practice, you'll see that these two paths aren't standing on opposite sides of the magical world. In fact, they're often dancing the same dance, just to slightly different tunes. So let's talk about what both of these paths actually do. Strip away the labels for a moment. What's left? You'll find deep relationships with nature, seasonal celebrations, ancestral work, spirit communication, and the magical use of herbs, stones, symbols, and ritual. Sounds familiar, right? That's because both traditional witchcraft and traditional Wicca are built on the same roots, ancient, earthy, spirit-led traditions that revolve around the cycles of the earth and the turning of the wheel. Let's start with nature reverence. Both paths are profoundly tied to the land. Traditional witches might call to the spirit of the hedge, the crossroads, or their local river. Wiccans call the quarters, honor the elements, and attune to the seasons through their Sabbats. Same energy, different approach. In both cases, you're engaging with the natural world as a living, breathing force that has something to say and something to teach. Whether you're in a grove calling on the Lord and Lady, or in your backyard leaving an offering to a land wight, you're participating in that same sacred relationship. Then there's ancestor veneration, which gets treated like this hidden gem of traditional witchcraft, as if Wiccans don't do that too. But if you dig into any serious Wiccan practice, especially traditional Wicca, honoring the mighty dead, the hidden company, or the ancestors of blood and spirit is a major part of the work. Wicca may not always shout it from the rooftops, but ancestral reverence is woven into its initiatory mysteries, rituals of Samhain, and even coven lineage. It's not an afterthought, it's a sacred ground. Now let's talk magic. Spellcraft, charms, protection rituals, divination, herbal brews, candle work, these are not exclusive to any one tradition. You'll find them in both camps. The difference often lies in how they're framed. Traditional witches might lean into folk charms passed through family lines or ancestral gnosis. Wiccans tend to perform magic within a ritually consecrated space, calling the quarters, invoking deities, and working with ritual tools in a set format. But whether you're using a blackthorn wand or an athame, whether your ritual takes place under the moon in silence or within a full moon esbit with your coven, you're channeling the same forces. The flavor might vary, but the meal is still magic. Even spirit work, another area people often claim belongs solely to traditional witchcraft, is deeply present in Wicca. Traditional Wiccans, again, Gardnerians, Alexandrians, the British traditional witchcraft, basically, that is initiatory, call upon gods, spirits of the land, and the watchers of the circle. They commune with their coven's egregore, call upon elemental beings, and work with inner plane contacts. It might not be called hedge riding, but the crossing between the worlds is very much part of Wicca's core practices, especially during Sabbats like Samhain or rites of initiation. The experience of trance, altered states, and communion with the unseen isn't foreign to Wiccans. It's just dressed in different clothing. Here's the thing most folks miss. Traditional Wicca didn't grow in isolation. It pulled from folk magic, ceremonial practices, and spiritual traditions, both old and evolving. Traditional witchcraft did too. That's why so many practices overlap. They might use different terms or tools, but the heartbeat is often the same. And sometimes the only real difference is whether you're working within a religious framework like traditional Wicca or a secular mystical one like most forms of traditional witchcraft. Now, don't get me wrong, there are differences. Traditional witchcraft often doesn't concern itself with divine polarity or structured coven dynamics. It can be more solitary, more regional, and less inclined towards structured rites. Wicca, particularly in its traditional form, carries a full liturgical calendar, established degrees, and a theology rooted in the interplay of the god and goddess. But none of that cancels out the overlapping practices both systems cherish. At the end of the day, the craft, no matter what title it wears, is about building relationship. Relationship with spirit, with land, with our ancestors, and with the deeper mysteries of existence. Whether you approach those mysteries through a Wiccan lens or a more folklore-driven path, you're still working the weave. And recognizing that shared ground doesn't just build understanding, it builds respect, because this isn't a competition. It's a crossroads, and we're all just following the path that calls our name. When most people hear the word religion, they picture stiff pews, guilt trips, and someone telling them what to do and when to do it. So it's no surprise that a lot of modern witches flinch when they hear Wicca described as a religion. But traditional Wicca isn't about rules or hierarchy just for the sake of it. It's about rhythm, it's about sacred structure, and most importantly, it's about the magical power that comes from walking a well-worn, spiritually enriching path, one that offers more than just spell work or seasonal celebrations. Now, before anyone gets defensive, let's make one thing crystal clear. Traditional witchcraft is absolutely valid. It's powerful, it's real, and it works. But what sets traditional Wicca apart is that it wraps the craft into a full-fledged spiritual system. It's not just about what you do, it's also about how you connect, how you grow, and how you experience with divine overtime. So, what exactly does Wicca bring to the table that adds that extra layer? First off, deity connection. In traditional Wicca, we don't just work with energy, we commune with the divine. The god and the goddess aren't distant cosmic forces. They're deeply personal, eminent deities who reflect the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. They are part of every Sabbat, every Esbit, every initiation. The entire wheel of the year becomes a living myth, one that the practitioner doesn't just observe, but actively participates in. You become a part of the sacred story unfolding in nature and within yourself. Then there's the initiatory structure. A lot of people misunderstand this. They think it's about gatekeeping or collecting titles, but initiation in traditional Wicca is about transformation. It's about committing to a spiritual journey that changes you from the inside out. Each degree unlocks new understandings, deeper mysteries, and a stronger connection with the divine and the craft itself. It's not about being better than someone else. It's about being more aware, more refined in your energy, and more attuned to the deeper layers of magic and mystery. Traditional Wicca also brings something incredibly valuable to the table: ritual consistency. Now, I'm not saying spontaneous rituals aren't amazing. I call out to my local Unitarian Universalist church back in the day in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where we did the shotgun rituals, they called them, where we just kind of made it up in 15 minutes before we did it and ran out and did it. And these rituals were great. But Wicca's set rituals act like keys that open doorways again and again. There's a kind of power that builds over time when you do something with intention, repetition, and reverence. You don't just light a candle, you invoke, you open a circle, you ground and center, you align with sacred time and space. The act becomes a conversation with the cosmos rather than a monologue into the void. Let's not forget about coven work either. Traditional Wicca thrives in community. A coven isn't just a group of witches who hang out and cast spells, it's a spiritual family. The group dynamic allows for shared growth, mirrored lessons, and collective wisdom that solo paths don't always provide. Through ritual together, initiations, and training, each person becomes a part of a greater whole. You're not walking the path alone. You're walking with others who are equally devoted to exploring the mysteries with integrity and purpose. Now here's the kicker. None of this takes away from the hands-on practices shared with traditional witchcraft. You can still work with herbs, honor the spirits of the land, practice divination, and celebrate the Sabbats. But in traditional Wicca, these aren't standalone actions. They're part of a holistic spiritual lifestyle. Everything connects. Everything feeds into something greater. You're not just casting a spell. You're tapping into an ancient current that has been built and refined through generations of ritual, devotion, and intention. So when we say traditional Wicca offers more, it's not a slight to, other paths. It's an invitation to look deeper, to explore the possibility of having not just a practice, but a spiritual home, a complete system that holds you, teaches you, and evolves with you. It's the difference between having a map and being handed a compass that helps you uncover your own inner landscape layer by layer. For some, that extra structure might feel like too much, and that's okay. But for others, especially those longing for a deeper sense of connection and meaning, traditional Wicca offers more than tools and technique. It offers mystery, transformation, and a sacred rhythm that ties it all together in a way that's both powerful and profoundly personal. So here we are, smack dab in the middle of a spiritual renaissance, or maybe a rebranding campaign, depending on how you look at it. Over the last several years, there's been a huge uptick in folks suddenly identifying as practitioners of traditional witchcraft. It's in book titles, TikToks, podcast intros, you name it. But here's the thing no one really wants to say out loud, so I'm gonna do it. A lot of what's being sold as traditional witchcraft today looks an awful lot like eclectic Wicca with a different label slapped on it. Let's break that down. First off, I'm not knocking the real deal traditional witches out there, the ones working with their ancestral land, honoring local spirits, and keeping old family customs alive. Yes, that is authentic as authentic can be, and I think you guys are awesome. And you totally deserve respect. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about the wave of new practitioners calling themselves traditional witches who are, in all honesty, just mixing and matching practices the same way eclectic Wiccans have been doing for decades, except now it's being framed as something older, darker, and somehow more valid. The appeal is obvious. Traditional witchcraft sounds raw, edgy, and mysterious. It suggests ancient roots, secret knowledge, and independence from organized anything. For you folks burned out on the more public, polished, and sometimes commercial face of Wicca, that darker aesthetic feels refreshing, like going underground after being in the spotlight too long. It's like Wicca was the garage band that went mainstream, and now everyone wants to go back to their gritty, do-it-yourself roots. But here's the catch. Many of these so-called traditional witchcraft practices, they're already part of traditional Wicca. Working with these spirits of the land, check. Honoring ancestors, yep. Celebrating the turning of the wheel, casting protective spells, drawing from folklore, all there. The difference is that traditional Wicca wraps those practices in a sacred framework with initiatory depth and spiritual philosophy. It's not missing any of those juicy components. It's just presenting them within a structured path that actually enhances their power and purpose. So why the sudden push to ditch the Wicca label? Honestly, part of it comes down to image. Wicca, especially in the public eye, got a bit too sparkly for some folks' taste. Between social media influencers doing love spells on a Friday night and crystal kits sold next to yoga mats, a lot of people started seeing Wicca as watered down or surface level. But that's not traditional Wicca's fault. That's a result of the eclectic boom that happened in the 90s and early 2000s, where everyone was encouraged to do your own thing without context or foundation. So now that people are craving deeper meaning instead of returning to the roots of traditional Wicca, they're slapping the word traditional on a new version of eclecticism and calling it something ancient. But here's the honest truth. You can't just relabel a salad and call it a stew. If you're still pulling from 10 different sources with no consistent spiritual structure or training, that's not traditional witchcraft. It's still eclecticism, just in earth tones and spooky lighting. And that wouldn't be a problem if people were honest about it. The issue is when folks start acting acting like Wicca is less than, like it's something to graduate from or rebel against, that attitude erases the depth, complexity, and spiritual discipline of traditional Wicca, and it's simply not accurate. You don't have to like Wicca, but let's not pretend it doesn't already include most of what these modern traditional witches are doing. In fact, it often includes more: ritual consistency, spiritual lineage, and an initiatory journey that challenges you to evolve. So if someone's out there lighting candles on the Sabbats, calling to the spirits of place, and honoring ancestors at Samhain, guess what? They're doing exactly what traditional Wiccans have been doing for decades. The only difference is that Wicca names it, ritualizes it, and teaches it within a deeper framework that connects those practices to myth, deity, and magical philosophy. The takeaway here isn't to divide or gatekeep, it's to clarify. Let's celebrate the rise of interest in traditional practices, absolutely. Let's just also be honest about where those practices are coming from and who's been doing them all along. Traditional Wicca didn't go anywhere. It just got overshadowed for a bit by trendier labels. But if you peel back the surface, you'll find it's still doing the work, still holding the mysteries, still walking the path with reverence, intention, and depth. At the end of the day, when you strip away the names, the robes, the candles, and the online debates, what are we really left with? A path, a calling, a shared connection to something deeper than ourselves. Whether someone identifies as a traditional witch or a traditional Wiccan, the truth is we're all tapping into the same current. The labels might be different, but the energy, the essence, that's where things start to overlap in the best possible way. This whole us versus them thing that sometimes pops up between traditional witchcraft and traditional Wicca, it's honestly kind of silly. Sure, the approaches can differ. One might be more structured and devotional, the other more folkloric and freeform, but both are grounded in the rhythms of nature, the honoring of spirit, and the weaving of magic into everyday life. That shared core is what really matters. Let's look at the big picture here. Both paths respect the land, the turning of the seasons, and the wisdom of those who came before us. Both recognize that there's more to this world than what we see with our physical eyes. And both offer tools, whether ritual, symbolic, or practical, that help us deepen our understanding of that unseen world. That's not competition, that's kinship. The drama often starts when folks get caught up in trying to define the craft too narrowly, like there's only one right way to be a witch. But the truth is, the craft has always been diverse. It's lived and breathed differently in every culture, every household, every solitary practice and coven alike. That's the beauty of it. It's not a franchise. It's a living tradition that adapts and grows with those who walk it. So why gate it off with unnecessary division? Some might say traditional Wicca is too religious. Others argue that traditional witchcraft is too disconnected from spirituality. But here's a radical idea. What if they both just emphasized different sides of the same coin? Traditional Wicca brings in the sacred, ritual, structure, deity, worship, initiatory depth. Traditional witchcraft brings in the raw, folk wisdom, land-based spirits, ancestral memory. Together, they paint a full picture of what it means to live a magical life in harmony with the world around you. And truth be told, many people are already blending the two, whether they realize it or not. I do, always have. Gardnerians in nature, I'm a Gardnerian Wiccan, it's always been that way. We've always blended the two. As a matter of fact, when I started hearing about traditional witchcraft, the real one, not the one that's, the eclectic rebrand, I was like, we do this already. Like, what, I don't understand. Like, this is basically Gardnerian witchcraft, but without the religion. Anyway, a Wiccan might call on the spirits of place before casting a circle. A traditional witch might celebrate the Sabbats without naming the god and goddess, but still feel the sacred energy of the turning year. These aren't contradictions, they're conversations, layers, echoes of a craft that's always been multifaceted. This video isn't about convincing someone to change paths or convert to a particular tradition. It's about pulling back the curtain and saying, hey, look how much we already have in common. It's about realizing that whether you wear a pentacle, a hagstone, or nothing at all, what binds us is stronger than what separates us. The heart of the craft has never been about ego or elitism. It's about reverence, intention, and connection. If we spend too much time pointing fingers or drawing lines in the sand, we lose sight of the real work, healing, growing, communing with spirit, and empowering ourselves and each other. That's the legacy we're part of, whether we step into it with a wand, a bone knife, or a whispered word to the moon. So maybe instead of arguing over who has the more authentic practice, we should be sharing stories, comparing notes, and learning from one another. Because when you step back and look at the bigger picture, it becomes clear. We're not that different. We're all walking through the woods, lanterns in hand, chasing after mystery and magic and meaning. And if you ask me, the craft is big enough for all of us. When it comes down to it, whether you call yourself a traditional witch or a traditional Wiccan, we're all stirring the same cauldron, just with different spoons. This whole journey we've taken together throughout this video has been about untangling the misconceptions, honoring the similarities, and shining a light on the deeper truth that often gets buried under labels and online arguments. Traditional Wicca isn't lacking in earthiness or authenticity. It holds the same sacred threads of practice found in traditional witchcraft, with the added richness of spiritual framework, initiatory wisdom, and connection to divine polarity. It's not a different language, it's just another dialect of the same ancient voice. So instead of drawing hard lines between paths, maybe it's time we recognize that the craft has always been bigger than any one tradition. It's fluid, living, and full of nuance. The real magic happens not when we try to out-authenticate each other, but when we realize how much we share and how much we can learn from one another. The world needs more witches who walk their path with both reverence and curiosity. So whether you're robed in ritual or barefoot in the bramble, keep walking, keep weaving, and most of all, keep honoring the spirit that brought you to the craft in the first place. Well, that's going to wrap up this episode of Witch in the Working. Do you practice traditional Wicca, eclectic Wicca, or traditional witchcraft? How do you feel about my outtake on this subject? Let us all know down in the comments below. I know these comments are going to be very juicy, so I'm looking forward to them. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and please subscribe if you haven't already, and don't forget to ring that little bell to be reminded of the wonderful and exciting future episodes to come. I love you guys and gals. Blessed be.